video. Yeah, I was just arguing the point on the difference between the 20th and 21st century regarding, what was it, relevance and relevance. Oh, fuck, I don't remember now. I'm high. Alright. I got it. Shut up. I think I figured most of this out. Shut up. Nope, I got it. Shut up. The pilot, James Fenimore Cooper, Chapter 4. Behold the threatened sails, borne with the invisible and creeping winds. Draw the huge bottoms through the furrowed sea, breasting the lofty surge. Breasting the lofty surge. Shakespeare. Yeah, I'm not a great reader. Fuck you. All right. It has been already explained to the reader that there were threatening symptoms in the appearance of the weather to create serious forebodings of evil in the breast of a seaman. When removed from the shadows of the cliffs, the night was not so dark, but objects could be discerned at some little distance, and in the eastern horizon there was a streak of fearful light impending over the gloomy waters, in which the swelling outline formed by the rising more alarming. Several dark clouds overhung the vessel, whose towering mass apparently propped the black vapor, while a few stars were seen twinkling with a sickly flame in the streak of a clear sky that skirted the ocean. Still, light currents of air occasionally swept across the bay, bringing with them the fresh odor from the shore. But their flitting irregularity too surely foretold them to be the expiring breath of the land breeze. The roaring of the surf as it rolled on the margin of the bay produced a dull, monotonous sound that was only interrupted at times by a hollow bellowing as a larger wave than usual broke violently against some cavity in the rock. Everything, in short, united to render the scene gloomy and portentous without creating instant terror, for the ship rose easily on the long billows without even straightening the heavy cable that held her to her anchor. The higher officers were collected around the captain, engaged in earnest discourse about their situation and prospects, while some of the oldest and most favored seamen would extend their short walk to the hallowed precincts of the quarterdeck to catch with greedy ears the opinions that fell from their superiors. Numberless were the uneasy glances that were thrown from both officers and men at their commander and the pilot, who still continued their secret communion in the distant part of the vessel. Once, an ungovernable curiosity, or the heedlessness of his years, led one of the youthful midshipmen near them, but a stern rebuke from the captain sent the boy, abashed and cowering, to hide his mortification among his fellows. This reprimand was received by the elder officers as an intimation that the consultation which they beheld was to be strictly inviolate, and though it by no means suppressed the repeated expressions of their impatience, it effectually prevented an interruption to the communications, which all, however, thought were unreasonably protracted for the occasion. "This is no time to be talking over bearings and distances," observed the officer next in rank to Griffith. but we should call the hands up and try to kedge her off while the sea will suffer a boat to live. 'Twould be a tedious and bootless job to attempt warping a ship for miles against the head-beating sea," returned the first lieutenant. "But the first land breeze yet flutters aloft, and if our light sails would draw, with the aid of the ebb tide, we might be able to shove her from the shore." "Hail the tops, Griffith," said the other, "and ask if they feel the air above. 'Twill be a hint at least to set the old man and that lubberly pilot in motion." Griffith laughed as he complied with the request, and when he received the customary reply to his call, he demanded in a loud voice, "Which way have you the wind aloft?" "We feel a light catspaw now and then from the land, sir," returned the sturdy captain of the top, "but our topsail hangs in the clew-lines, sir, without winking." Captain Munson and his companions suspending their discourse while the question and answer were exchanged, and then resumed their dialogue in earnest as if it had received no interruption. "If it did wink, the hint would be lost on our betters," said the officer of the Marines, whose ignorance of seamanship added greatly to his perception of the danger, but who, for pure idleness, made more jokes than any other man in the ship. "The pilot would not receive a delicate intimation through his ears, Mr. Griffith. Suppose you try him by the nose." "Faith, there was a flash of gunpowder between us and the barge," returned the first lieutenant, "and he does not seem a man to stomach such hints as you advise. Although he looks so meek and quiet, I doubt whether he has paid much attention to the book of Job." "Why should he?" exclaimed the chaplain, whose apprehensions at least equaled those of the Marine, and with a much more disheartening effort. "I am sure it would have been a great waste of time. There are so many charts of the coast and books on the navigation of the seas for him to study, that I sincerely hope he has been much better employed." A loud laugh was created at this speech among the listeners, and it apparently produced the effect that was so anxiously desired, by putting an end to the mysterious conference between their captain and the pilot, and the former came forward towards his expecting crew. He said in the composed, steady manner that formed a principal trait of his character, "Get the anchor, Mr. Griffith, and make sail on the ship. The hour has arrived when we must be moving." The cheerful "Aye, aye, sir," of the young lieutenant was hardly uttered before the cries of half a dozen midshipmen were heard summoning the boatswain and his mates to their duty. There was a general movement in the living masses that clustered around the mainmast, on the booms, and in the gangways. Though their habits of discipline held the crew of moment longer in suspense, the silence was first broken by the sound of the boatswain's whistle, followed by the hoarse cry, "All hands up! Up anchor, ahoy!" the former rising on the night air from its first low mellow notes to a piercing shrillness that gradually died away on the waters, and the latter bellowing through every cranny of the ship, like the hollow murmurs of a distant thunder. The change produced by the customary summons was magical. Human beings sprang out from between the guns, rushed up the hatches, threw themselves with careless activity from the booms, and gathered from every quarter so rapidly that in an instant the deck of the frigate was alive with men. The profound silence that had hitherto been only interrupted by the low dialogue of the officers was now changed for the stern orders of the lieutenants, mingled with the shriller cries of the midshipmen, and the hoarse bawling of the boatswain's crew, rising above the tumult of preparation and general bustle. The captain and the pilot alone remained passive in this scene of general exertion, for apprehension had even stimulated that class of officers which is called idlers to unusual activity, though frequently reminded by their more experienced messmates that instead of aiding they retarded the duty of the vessel. The bustle, however, gradually ceased, and in a few minutes the same silence pervaded the ship as before. "We are brought to, sir," said Griffith, who stood overlooking the scene, holding in one hand a short speaking trumpet, and grasping with the other one of the shrouds of the ship, to steady himself in the position he had taken on the gun. "Heave round, sir," was the calm reply. "Heave round," replied Griffith aloud. "Heave round," echoed the dozen eager voices at once, and the lively strains of a fife struck up a brisk air to enliven the labor. The capstan was instantly set in motion, and the measured tread of the seamen was heard as they stamped the deck in the circle of their march. For a few minutes no other sounds were heard. If we accept the voice of an officer, occasionally cheering the officer when it was announced that they were short, or in other words, that the ship was nearly over her anchor. "Heave and all!" cried Griffith, when the quivering notes of the whistle were again succeeded by a general stillness in the vessel. "What is to be done now, sir?" continued the lieutenant. "Shall we trip the anchor? There seems not a breath of air, and as the tide runs slack, I doubt whether the sea do not heave the ship ashore." There was so much obvious truth in this conjecture that all eyes turned from the light and animation afforded by the decks of the frigate to look abroad on the waters in a vain desire to pierce the darkness, as if to read the fate of their apparently devoted ship from the aspect of nature. "I leave all to the pilot," said the captain, after he had stood a short time by the side of Griffith, anxiously studying the heavens and the ocean. "What say you, Mr. Gray?" The man who thus first addressed by name was leaning over the bulwarks, with his eyes fixed in the same direction as the others. But as he answered, he turned his face towards the speaker, and the light from the deck fell upon his quiet features, which exhibited a calmness bordering on the supernatural, considering his station and responsibility. "There is much to fear from this heavy ground swell," he said in the same unmoved tones as before, "but there is certain destruction to us if the gale that is brewing in the east finds us waiting its fury in this wild anchorage. All the hemp that ever was spun into cordage would not hold a ship in an hour, chafing on these rocks with a northeastern pouring its fury on her. If the powers of man can compass it, gentlemen, we must get an offing, and that speedily." "You say no more, sir, than the youngest boy in the ship can see for himself," said Griffith. "Ha! Here comes the schooner." The dashing of the long sweeps of the water was now plainly audible, and the little Ariel was seen through the gloom, moving heavily under the feeble impulse. As she passed slowly under the stern of the frigate, the cheerful voice of Barnstable was first heard, opening the communications between them. "Here's a night for spectacles, Mr. Munson," he cried. "But I thought I heard your fife, sir. I trust in God you do not mean to write it out here till morning." "I like the berth as little as yourself, Mr. Barnstable," returned the veteran seaman, in his calm manner, in which anxiety was, however, beginning to grow evident. "We are short, but are afraid to let go our hold of the bottom, lest the sea cast us ashore. How make you out the wind?" "Wind!" echoed the other. "There is not enough to blow a lady's curl aside. If you wait, sir, till the land breeze fills your sails, you will wait another moon. I believe I got my eggshell out of that nest of gray caps. But how it has been done in the dark, a better man than myself must explain." "Take your directions from the pilot, Mr. Barnstable," returned his commanding officer, "and follow them strictly and to the letter." A death-like silence in both vessels succeeded this order, for all seemed to listen eagerly to catch the words that fell from the man on whom even the boys now felt depended their only hopes for safety. A short time was suffered to elapse before his voice was heard in the same low but distinct tones as before. "Your sweeps will soon be of no service to you," he said, "against the sea that begins to heave in, but your light sails will help them to get you out. So long as you can head east and by north, you are doing well, and you can stand until you open the light from that northern headland, and when you can heave to and fire a gun. But if, as I dread, you are struck aback before you open the light, you must trust to your lead on the larboard track, but beware with your head to the southward, for no lead will serve you there." Oh my goodness, that's awesome. I'm not even a nautical guy, but that's fucking awesome. I know it took a moment. "I can walk over the same ground on one tack as on the other," said Barnstable, "and make both legs of the length." "It will not do," returned the pilot. "If you fall off a point to starboard from east and by north in going large, you will find both rocks and points of shoals to bring you up, and beware, I tell you, of the starboard tack." "And how shall I find my way?" "You let me trust to neither time, lead nor log. You must trust to a quick eye and a ready hand. The breakers only will show you the dangers when you are not able to make out the bearings of the land. Tack in season, sir, and don't spare the lead when you head to port." "Aye, aye," returned Barnstable in a low, muttering voice. This is a sort of blind navigation with a vengeance, and all for no purpose that I can see." "See? Damn! Eyesight is of about as much use now as a man's nose would be in reading the Bible." "Softly, softly, Mr. Barnstable," interrupted his commander, for such was the anxious stillness in both vessels that even the rattling of the schooner's rigging was heard as she rolled in the trough of the sea. "The duty on which Congress has sent us must be performed at the hazard of our lives." "I don't mind my life, Captain Munson," said Barnstable, "but there is a great want of conscience in trusting a vessel in such a place as this. However, it is a time to do and not to talk. But if there be such a danger to an easy drop of water, what will become of the frigate? Had I not better play jackal and try and feel the way for you?" "I thank you," said the pilot. "The offer is generous, but would avail us nothing. I have the advantage of knowing the ground well, and must trust to my memory and God's good favor. Make sail, sir. If you succeed, we will venture to break ground." The order was promptly obeyed, and in a very short time the Ariel was covered with canvas. Though no air was perceptible on the decks of the frigate, the little schooner was so light that she succeeded in stemming her way over the rising waves, aided a little by the tide, and in a few minutes her low hull was just discernible in the streak of light among the horizon, with the dark outline of her sails rising above the sea until their fanciful summits were lost in the shadows of the clouds. Griffith had listened to the foregoing dialogue, like the rest of the junior officers, in profound silence, but when the Ariel began to grow indistinct to the eyes, he jumped lightly from the gun to the deck and cried, "She slips off like a vessel from the stocks. Shall I trip the anchor, sir, and follow?" "We have no choice," replied the captain. "You hear the question, Mr. Gray. Shall we go to the bottom?" "It must be done, Captain Munson. We must want more drift than the rest of this tide to get us to a place of safety. And the pilot, I would give 5 years from a life that I would know will be short if the ship lay 1 mile farther seaward." Oh my goodness. Good times. 19th century literature read poorly. Good for you, man. This remark was unheard by all, except the commander of the frigate, who again walked aside with the pilot, where they resumed their mysterious communications. The words of assent were no sooner uttered, however, than Griffith gave forth from his trumpet the command of "Heave away!" Again the strains of the fife were followed by the tread of the men at the capstan. At the same time that the anchor was heaving up, the sails were loosened from the yards and opened to invite the breeze. In effecting this duty, the orders were thundered through the trumpet of the first lieutenant and executed with the rapidity of thought. Men were to be seen like spots in the dim lights from the heavens, lying on every yard or hanging as in air, while strange cries were heard issuing from every part of the rigging and each spar of the vessel. "Ready for the fore-rail!" cried a shrill voice, as if from the clouds. "Ready for the foreyard!" uttered the hoarser tones of a seaman beneath him. "All ready aft, sir!" cried a third, and from another quarter, and in a few minutes the order was given to "let fall." The little light which fell from the sky was now excluded by the falling canvas, and a deeper gloom was cast athwart the decks of the ship, that served to render the brilliancy of the lanterns even vivid, while it gave to objects outboard a more appalling and dreary appearance than ever before. Every individual, excepting the commander and his associate, was now earnestly engaged in getting the ship under way. The sounds of "We're away!" were repeated by a burst from 50 voices, and the rapid evolutions of the capstan announced that nothing but the weight of the anchor was to be lifted. Wow. The hauling of cordage, the rattling of blocks, blended with the shrill calls of the boatswain and his mates, succeeded, and though to a landsman all would have appeared confusion and hurry, long practice and strict discipline enabled the crew to exhibit their ship under a cloud of canvas, from her deck to the trucks, in less time than we have consumed in relating it. I'm going to light a cigarette. 1 moment. For a few minutes, the officers were not disappointed by the result, for though the heavy sails flapped lazily against the masts, the light duck on the loftier spars swelled outwardly, and the ship began sensibly to yield to their influence. She travels!" exclaimed Griffith joyously. "Ah, the hussy! She has as much antipathy to the land as any fish that swims. It blows a little gale aloft yet." "We feel its dying breath," said the pilot in low, soothing tones, but in a manner so sudden as to startle Griffith, at whose elbow they were unexpectedly uttered. "Let us forget, young man, everything but the number of lives that depend this night on your exertions and my knowledge. If you be but half as able to exhibit the one as I am willing to make the other, we shall do well," returned the lieutenant in the same tone. "Remember, whatever may be your feelings, that we are on the enemy's coast, and love it not enough to wish to lay our bones there." With this brief explanation, they separated, the vessel requiring the constant and close attention of the officer to her movements. The exultation produced in the crew by the progress of their ship through the water was of short duration, for the breeze that had seemed to await their motions, after forcing the vessel for a quarter of a mile, fluttered for a few minutes amid their light canvas, and then left them entirely. The quartermaster, whose duty it was to superintend the helm, soon announced that he was losing the command of the vessel, and she was no longer obedient to her rudder. This ungrateful intelligence was promptly communicated to his commander by Griffith, who suggested the propriety of again dropping an anchor. "I refer you to Mr. Gray," returned the captain. "He is the pilot, sir, and with him rests the safety of the vessel." "Pilots sometimes lose ships as well as save them," said Griffith. Know you the man well, Captain Munson, who holds all our lives in his keeping, and is so coolly as if he cared but little for their venture?" "Mr. Griffith, I do know him. He is, in my opinion, both competent and faithful. This much I tell you, to relieve your anxiety. More you must not ask. But is there not a shift of wind?" "God forbid!" exclaimed his lieutenant. "If that northeaster catches us within the shoals, our case will be desperate indeed." The heavy rolling of the vessel, caused an occasional expansion, and as sudden a reaction in their sails, which left the oldest seaman in the ship in doubt which way the currents of air were passing, or whether there existed any that were not created by the flapping of their own canvas. The head of the ship, however, began to fall from the sea, and notwithstanding the darkness, and soon it became apparent that she was driving in bodily towards the shore. Holy shit. During these few minutes of gloomy doubt, Griffith, by one of those sudden revulsions of the mind that connect the opposite extremes of feelings, lost his animated anxiety, and relapsed into the listless apathy that so often came over him, even in the most critical moments of trial and danger. He was standing with one elbow resting on his capstan, shading his eyes from the light of the battle lantern that stood near him with one hand, when he felt a gentle pressure on the other that recalled his recollection. Looking affectionately, though still recklessly, at the boy who stood at his side, he said, "Dull music, Mr. Merry." "So dull, sir, that I can't dance to it," returned the midshipman. "Nor do I believe that there is a man in this ship who would not rather hear the girl I left behind me than those execrable sounds." "What sounds, boy? The ship is as quiet as the Quaker meeting in the Jerseys before your good old grandfather used to break the charm of silence with his sonorous voice." "Ha ha! Laugh at my peaceable blood if thou wilt, Mr. Griffith," said the arch youngster. "But remember, there is a mixture of it in all sorts of veins. I wish I could hear one of the old gentleman's chants now, sir. I could always sleep to them, like a gull in the surf. But he that sleeps tonight with that lullaby will make a nap of it." "Sounds? I hear no sounds, boy, but the flapping aloft. Even Even that pilot who struts the quarterdeck like an admiral has nothing to say. Is not that a sound to open a seaman's oar? Is not that a sound to open a seaman's oar? Seaman's ear? It is in truth a heavy roll of the surf, lad, but the night air carries it heavily to our ears. Know you not the sound of that surf yet, yonker? I know it well, Mr. Griffith, and do not wish to know it better. How fast are we tumbling in towards that surf, sir? I think we hold our own, said Griffith, rousing again. Though we had better anchor. Luff, fellow, luff, you are broadside to the sea. The man at the wheel repeated his former intelligence, adding a suggestion that he thought the ship was gathering sternway. Haul up your courses, Mr. Griffith, said Captain Munson, and let us feel the wind. The rattling of the blocks was soon heard, and the enormous sheets of canvas that hung from the lower yards was instantly suspended in the brails. When this change was effected, all on board stood silent and breathless, as if expecting to learn their fate by result. Several contradictory opinions were at length hazarded among the officers, when Griffith seized the candle from the lantern, and springing on one of the guns, held it on high, exposing to the action of the air. The little flame waved, with uncertain glimmering, for a moment, and then burned steadily in a line with the mass. Griffith was about to lower his extended arm, when, feeling slight sensation of coolness on his hand, he paused, and the light turned slowly towards the land, flared, flickered, and finally deserted the wick. "Lose not a moment, Mr. Griffith," cried the pilot aloud. "Clew up and furl, everything but your 3 topsails, and let them be double reefed. Now is the time to fulfill your promise." The young man paused one moment in astonishment as the clear, distinct tones of the stranger struck his ears so unexpectedly, but turning his eyes to seaward, he sprang on the deck and proceeded to obey the order, as if life and death depended on his dispatch. Chapter 4.